We can get started now.
Okay.
Yep.
Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome. Thank you for tuning in to today's webinar on designing behaviorally for exceptional experience. We're really excited about this, and we're glad each one of you could join us. I'm Anushri, and I'm the Director of Marketing at India Behavioral Economics Network, and I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for today. We have with us two distinguished speakers from Cowry, based out of the UK. Rafael March is the Chief Design Officer at Cowry Consulting and has been working with Cowry for over 5 years now. She has a background in perceptual psychology and has led the experience optimization process for over 50 of the world's major brands across retail, health, and finance. We're excited to have you with us, Rafi.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Alongside her is Phoebe Kent. Phoebe works as a senior behavioral designer at Cowry. She uses academic insights as a foundation to design and implement behavior change interventions to tackle a range of business challenges. Rafi and Phoebe, we're delighted to have you both with us today, and we're really looking forward to the session.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
Okay, before we jump into the session, I have a couple of announcements. For your questions, please use the Mentimeter link we've set up. We'll share the details on the YouTube chat box. Please post your questions there, and we'll have Rafi and Phoebe address them at the end of the session. Please feel free to participate in conversations with other participants on the YouTube live chat. Over to you, Phoebe and Rafi.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I will start sharing my screen. Okay, can we all see that?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Lovely. Okay, well, hello, everyone. We are incredibly excited to be here, and thank you so much for hosting us today. What we're going to focus on is what we think is an integral part of the applied behavioural science process. And we'd like to talk about how actually we can do behavioural design, but we can also start to think about how we can design in a behavioural way. So it's going to be an interactive session. So please make sure that you use the Mentimeter, and over the next hour or so, there are 3 things that we'll take you through. So we'll start by giving you an intro into who we are and how we define behavioural design. We'll then show you some thought-provoking real-world examples of where we've started to apply this with some of our clients. And then we'd also like to talk to you about a really exciting event that we're hosting this summer, and that we'd love for as many of you to get as involved as you possibly can. So I'll start by giving a little bit more context to who we are. As Anushri just said, I'm Rafi. I'm the Chief Design Officer at Cowry, and we're an applied behavioural science consultancy in the UK. My background is in perceptual psychology, but specifically how different sensory inputs affect your behaviour. I helped set up the business 5 years ago, and my main focus that I've been working on is to define a psychological design discipline within our process, and importantly, how we can use design to improve the overall execution of our designs. And then I'll let Phoebe give herself a little intro as well.
Thanks, Rafi. Hello, everyone. I'm Phoebe. I'm a senior behavioural designer at Cowry. My background is very much in core psychology, so everything from the biological basis of mental disorders to childhood development. And then I went to specialise in the area of applied psychology and economic behaviour, so looking at this whole area of nudge theory and how biases and heuristics influence our decision making. And since joining Cowry, sort of my world's been opened up to this field of what we call behavioural design. So thinking about how the visual appearance of assets and experiences influences our decision making. So really excited to be here with you today to share some of the work we've been doing.
Thanks, Phoebes. So at Cowry, our mission is to make businesses as humanly possible. And I think this feels more relevant than ever as we're moving through a COVID world at the moment, and we're having to become more and more digital. Because when we're innovating at a really fast pace, it's the person on the other side of the screen that often gets left behind. We're all struggling to hit different metrics and KPIs and increase growth, but actually we end up with these gaps between what the business is trying to achieve and what the customer actually needs. So we're trying really hard to help companies deliver the human touch in the digital economy. And we originally started as a behavioral finance consultancy. And you can see on the next slide here that there's quite a few financial clients that pop up time and time again. And this is because there's such a massive need to help customers understand the really complex world of finance. But we quickly branched out into other sectors, including retail, utilities, travel, insurance. But I guess the main thing is that no matter how big or successful a business has become, there's always a need, and they'll always benefit from applying behavioral science, because at the end of the day, we need to be speaking to customers in a really human way. And the way that we do that is through a team with a mixed skill set. So we started with just 3 of us back in 2016, and we've built up a really large team of psychologists with roles that complement our process. So each member specializes either in behavioral research, behavioral architecture, where they think more about the strategy, behavioral design, where it's very much focused on the execution of our interventions, and then experimental design, where we're testing the accuracy of all of our interventions to make sure that they're working and that we can reach statistical significance, that we can go back to the client and say with complete confidence, this is how we've managed to change the behavior for you. But for today, our main focus and what we'd like to talk to you about is on that execution stage, and specifically how we're using behavioral science to create better informed design. So on this next slide, I'm sure that this image will be familiar to most of you as behavioral scientists. We've obviously got Kahneman's 2 systems of thinking using Thaler's visual representation of Homer and Spock. We'll all know that 90 to 95% of our decisions are typically made using the Homer part of our brain. And I'm sure you'll also have experience that clients often make the mistake of speaking to Spock when they should actually be speaking to Homer. We're really keen to think that we are rational, so we're trying to give customers as much information as possible so they can make an informed decision, but it's causing these unintended consequences of actually just completely overwhelming them and they're not able to make a choice. So hopefully this feels quite familiar to you, but I think the industry's better kept secret is how behavioral science applies to design. And that's because a lot of people aren't actually doing it. So let's take a look at the psychology underpinning the design instead. So to start, 50% of your cortex is involved in visual processing. And I think this is quite important because when you compare this with your other senses, they actually only have 10% dedicated. So if you think about your touch, your taste, your smell, your hearing, we've actually got a lot more brain dedicated to what we see than all of the other senses. So although how we're making decisions is important, what's equally important is how we take in the information that allows us to make the decision in the first place. So how do we do that? Well, in addition to the amount of cortex that's dedicated towards visual processing, 70% of all of our sensory receptors are in our eyes. So again, to give you an idea of what a large percentage this is, let's think about your touch sensory receptors. Now, obviously your skin is an organ and all of our receptors are distributed all over our body, and it helps us to identify objects. It keeps us from harm, so we know we're not going to hurt ourselves. And if I could ask you to take 2 fingers and just place them in the center of your palm, what you can hopefully feel is that there are 2 fingers that are touching your palm. You're able to identify what's happening there. Now, if you take the same 2 fingers and just place them in the center of your back, it's slightly trickier to do. Hopefully you're more flexible than I am. But it's a lot more tricky to identify that there's actually 2 things that are touching you at one time. And that's because we've got a lot less sensory receptors in the center of our back than we do in the palm of our hand, which makes sense. We use our hands to help us figure out what we're touching. But again, we know that the sensory receptors aren't evenly distributed. And again, they're really heavily weighted to our eyes. And because of this, we can get a sense of a scene in less than 1/10 of a second. We're able to identify incredibly quickly what things are just using our eyes. But with any fast decisions that we're making, it comes with the price of mental biases. And it means that we are prone to making some unusual decisions or making some questionable behaviours. And just to bring that to life a little bit, I'd like to share a picture with you. So for those of you who aren't familiar, this is Margaret Thatcher. But I'd just like you to think about what's wrong with this picture, what's going on that's slightly unusual. And just to confirm, it's not that it's upside down, although that's true. I'll give you a second just to look at this. And then if we flip the image the other way, what you can see here is that there's now something that is very clearly wrong with this image. And this is the Margaret Thatcher illusion, and it was discovered by Peter Thompson, who is a professor at the University of York in the UK. And one of the things that he'd found is that the way that we process faces isn't bit by bit, so thinking about the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, but we process it holistically. And we're able to make a very quick first impression. And interestingly, this was actually discovered by accident, where he'd cut up a picture of Margaret Thatcher, and then he'd gone to get a coffee, and he'd come back and it was lying on his desk and it looked fairly normal. But then when he moved around the desk to sit down, again, it hit him that all of the pieces were upside down in a slightly unusual place. So I think that this particular illusion is quite important because it helps us think about how we absorb information. If we're looking at a website, if we're looking at a letter, if we're going into a store for the first time, we're taking information in a really specific way. And again, that changes by context, but it's important that we're not leaving this consideration out when we get to the final execution. And these particular reactions are called visceral reactions. Again, they're similar to the reactions that we have when we think about social norms, when we think about authority bias, when we think about mental accounting. They all originate from the same place in the central nervous system. And you can see on the left here, we've got a picture of a website. And here we haven't made any particular changes in terms of norms or the authority, again, any of the normal biases that you would use. But actually, instantly when we look at this page, there is particular information that immediately stands out to us and is helping us make a first impression to say, actually, do I trust this website? Do I like this website? Do I want to interact? So that first impression is incredibly important. And to bring that to life a little bit, I think it would be fun to do a small task. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a series of different websites, and all I'd like you to do is just write down on a scale of 1 to 9 how appealing you think the website is. So 1 being the least appealing, 9 being the most appealing. And if you jot these down, because in a moment we'll ask you to share them on a poll so that we can get an understanding of what everyone's answers are. Now, these are going to flash up quite quickly. So make sure you're jotting down as fast as possible, and there's a reason that we're doing that, and I'll explain after. So hopefully that's given everyone enough time to grab a paper or pen or phone to write these answers down, but we'll start the video now to show you the different websites. Lovely, so website 1 is popping up. There we go, website 2. Website 3, website 4, and website 5. So that's all of them over quick and easy. But to show you the answers that I put in just a moment, if before that we can just ask you to send in your answers via the Mentimeter poll. You can do this really easily on your phone or on a laptop. You just need to go to menti.com, and then the particular code to type in is 22856076. So in order, just write from the first website what score you gave it out of 9, second, third, fourth, fifth. And I'll show you my answers now as well, just so you can get an idea of how to pose this. So I actually gave website 1 a 1. I didn't think that it was particularly nice. Website 2 was a 2 in my books. Website 3, I gave a 3. And then there was a bit of a jump for website 4. I thought that it was a bit more visually appealing and I gave it a 6. And then website 5, I gave an 8. So I'll give you all a second just to make sure that you've had a chance to submit your answers. Lovely, and then we'll reveal the answers. Hopefully that should have been enough time. We've got the spinning wheel of death, which from a behavioural design perspective isn't the most behaviourally motivating thing. This is one of the things that comes up a lot that we talk to our clients about, where actually we're just priming for quite a negative response with this instead of showing the progress. But my expectations have not been managed well with this wheel. So fingers crossed it's going to load in just a second.
I think we're possibly logged in on the same account.
I'm not in there, if that helps.
Okay.
Link isn't working for the participants. Okay, that's no problem. We'll go back to the presentation. So this is a task that we tend to do quite often with our clients, and especially during our module 4 on our behavioural science expert course, where we train our clients to become better in the application of behavioural science. Module 4 is specifically focused on behavioural design. And what we've found when we do this particular exercise is that, interestingly, the ratings that come up for everyone that takes part tend to be incredibly similar. So I think we need to activate the quiz feeds. So we tend to see very similar scores time and time again. So very much starting with a much lower score on the first website and a much higher score on the final website. Do you want to press enter and hopefully that should start? Amazing. Okay, so if you guys would like to send in your ratings now, please pop them in. You've got 15 seconds to do so, just to make it more exciting. Use a bit of scarcity bias to get everyone moving. Amazing, we've got a couple of answers in here. There is no correct answer. That's also true. But okay, so from the answers we have got, or the ones that people have managed to submit, what you can see that's happening quite nicely here is that the numbers are quite low on the left-hand side, and they increase as you move across. So we're starting on 1, we're ending on 7. On the option on the top right, you can see we've gone 2, 3, 6, 5, 8. So there's a little bit of movement in the middle, but ultimately what you're getting is everyone is able to recognize from an incredibly short space of time, from just a half a second, that actually some of these websites are less appealing and some of the websites are more appealing. So if we take a look at the first website and the last website we've got here, the main difference that you can see here is that on the left, there's a lot of information going on. We've got lots of different colors, lots of text, lots of different fonts, 3 different columns that you have to pull your attention apart from, and it's all quite small. So overall, we've got a really low level of processing fluency on this page. It's really difficult to understand immediately why you're there, what you need to do, what the information is. Whereas on the right-hand side, where we've got the websites that have been rated a lot higher, on this page, the processing fluency is a lot higher. We're using a single image, we've got a hierarchy in terms of the text, and it's very clear to figure out what you need to do. But in that half a second, we're able to determine, okay, do I like this page? Does it look nice? And what we know is that if something does look nice, we're more likely to like it and we're more likely to interact with it. So it's really important to think about that initial impression of the website, of the asset, of the intervention that we are presenting to people to try and change behavior. And the reason that this happens is due to thin slicing. Hopefully you're all familiar with thin slicing. And again, it's where we're making really quick inferences about the details of a situation with really small amounts of information. And the most significant variable by far is the visual complexity of a website. When we're faced with too much information, we're forced to undergo a cost-benefit analysis. So is the perceived difficulty of a task less than the expected reward? Is it worth us doing? And we can use our knowledge of visual biases, similar to the Margaret Thatcher illusion, similar to the task that we just did around rating the website and how busy the pages are. We can use this information to make educated guesses around where people are going to look and what they're going to like. So although it's really important to do the initial research, it's really important to think about the behavioural strategy, the language that we're using, and the intervention that we're putting together. It's then also really important to think about that final stage where actually what's the execution? Often the teams that we speak to that are behavioural scientists, they're maybe not doing this stage that well. They might outsource to a designer to put this in place. But again, what we've got there is a designer trying to implement quite complex behavioral science techniques, and they might be able to produce a beautiful design, but actually we're missing out on increasing the efficacy of our interventions by a really large percentage, because we can actually implement psychology itself into the design. We can think about the colors that promote certain reactions. We can think about the text that actually makes us think that what we're reading is more intelligent than it is. There's lots of different design psychology principles that we can be applying that are going to make the interventions a lot more effective. And I guess just to put it in a slightly different way, when we think about the discipline itself, or maybe how we're thinking about behavioral design as a community, it's slightly different, I guess, the way that we're thinking about it to maybe how some others are. And this is because behavioral science and behavioral design, we think, are two different things, but they're often talked about in the same vein, where behavioral design becomes the designing of a behavior as opposed to the traditional sense of design in terms of the visual appearance. But interestingly, design and behavioral design also aren't aligned. So there's a difference between designing for aesthetic and making something look pretty versus designing a behavior. So it's really important that we're bringing the two disciplines together. We're using behavioral science and we're using psychological design to create this space in the middle where we're designing in a really behavioral way. And my advice to achieve this sweet spot in the middle is to consider the experience for the customer, place yourself in their shoes, and think about BJ Fogg's motivation versus ability. So, are we motivating the customer through the design? Are we making it as easy as possible for them to take on board the information? And then we can reach this sweet spot where you're starting to design behaviorally. So that's some context into how we're using this particular application. But now I'll hand over to Phoebe, who's going to take you through some real life examples of how we can apply this knowledge and increase the impact of behavioural science with our interventions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rafi. So to bring to life for you, I suppose, how we apply these different principles that Rafi's taken you through into our work, what I'm going to do is take you through 3 different case studies where we've applied these principles of behavioural design to get some really exciting behaviour change results. And the first one that I'm going to talk you through is a project we did in the health and safety arena. And this was actually taking place at a construction site. And what we found was that about 250 workers were attending a specific construction site every day. And this was a mix of different companies and internal staff. So there was lots of people moving through the site at any one time. And what they found was that workers would take up to 7 unnecessary risks every day. So whether that be not locking their ladder in place correctly, not locking the wheels on some of their movable equipment, or not shutting a gate. So these risks were happening very frequently, and that meant that the staff turnover was quite high. People were off being injured or off being sick. And construction sites are such hectic places for people to work. And this means that the operatives' cortisol and testosterone levels are actually very high. And And instead of relying on things like signs, giving safety information, or long safety videos talking the workers through particular processes, and those traditional strategies that we might expect, because it was such a high-profile scheme, Overbury wanted to use a really genuinely innovative approach, something that's perhaps a little bit unconventional, to make sure that we could really shift the dial of behaviour change. So they invited a team of Cowry to come onto the site for 4 weeks, identify what these unsafe behaviours were, and start designing strategies to help the workers engage more safely in their environment. And what we found, I think, that was quite interesting was that break times were a really important chance for the workers to cool down during their shift, sort of become into more of a relaxed emotional state, and really sort of trigger that calm mood that's needed to engage in safe behaviours. So there was a few different interventions that we used in the break room, including things like softer lighting, increased plants, communal tables where people could sit, because you can see from this picture on the screen that it's not very warm, it's not very welcoming. There's a lot of harsh colours, the bright yellows and the reds, these sort of warning colours that activate that sort of emotional stress within our brains. And so one of the interventions that I think is the most interesting that we applied here was to paint the break room a particular colour. And the area of colour psychology is really fascinating. I think one of my favourite studies on colour psychology was conducted during a student exam. And they found that when they put the colour red on a maths exam, students performed significantly worse than when they put the colour green on the maths exam, because the colour red activated the anxiety and made people's cognitive performance actually dip. So colour can have a really significant impact on our mood, our behaviour, and our cognitive processing. So I'd love to invite you all back on to Menti and have a guess at which colour you think we painted the break room to create a positive experience for the workers. So I'm going to go back to Menti. And we're going to start a countdown for you to post in your answer what colour you think we painted the walls. I think, again, we've got quite a quick time here. 15 seconds is counting down. Okay, we've got blue, we've got red, yellow, and pink. So some good answers. Definitely someone there said pink, which is absolutely the right answer. I think, blue is an interesting answer. We know that's associated with calmness. So I think that seems like that might have been a popular one, and definitely a good suggestion. But there's actually a psychological reason that we did use the colour pink. And it was actually a very specific shade of pink. And what we wanted to do was prime the operatives for a calmer emotional state, which would make them more likely to take their breaks and thus improve their overall well-being. So this intervention that we used, we painted their break room, not any shade of pink, but a very specific shade of pink called Baker Miller pink. And I think this is really interesting because this particular shade of pink has been scientifically proven to reduce your state of anxiety, reduce the state of stress and aggression. So what actually ended up happening was that the operatives then had a good state of well-being. They were able to make more balanced decisions, and they were more alert to the potential risks on site. And they actually use this specific colour of pink in the drunk tank in jails, because they know it causes that sense of calmness. It's called drunk tank pink in some places. So what it does is it calms people down, gets them to stop rushing. And I think this was a really interesting one because rather than lecturing the workers about why they should be safe and how they should be safe, we're using these small nudges to create these incremental changes in behaviour that help people feel good and make more balanced decisions. And Overbury have actually since committed to having at least one pink wall on every site as part of their site safety standards, which is really exciting. But I suppose in terms of real behaviour change, what we saw was an 82% reduction in recorded unsafe working at height behaviours. So when the workers were up a ladder or on a platform, there was an 82% reduction in the number of risks they were taking. So they were acting much more safely. And this was obviously one of a number of interventions that we introduced, including incentives and rewards cards. But the Baker-Miller Pink is a really nice example of that behavioural design and how the visual processing influences our behaviour. The second case study that I'd like to take you through is a project we did for Sky Kids. And they have about probably 24 million customers across 7 or 8 different countries all over the world. They're one of the leading media and entertainment companies that create this world for kids where they can immerse themselves and create a fun, personalized profile, enjoy educational games, and get creative in artistic formats. And one of the areas that the Sky team so they called in the Cowry team to see how we could look at the user experience to create a more effective and streamlined registration process. So what you can see on the screen here is a screenshot on the left of what their existing registration process looked like. And then on the right, you can see the Cowry behavioural design version. And there were 3 principles that we applied to this small change that you can see on the screen where we've just changed the buttons. There were 3 principles that we used in redesigning those buttons. And at Cowry, I'm sure Rafi will agree with me that we do get quite geeky about our buttons because there's actually lots of principles and psychology that you can bake into buttons to make them really persuasive and really effective. And the first one is the principle of saliency, which, as I'm sure you'll know, is the pieces in our environment that stand out in the visual field more are going to attract our attention and therefore make us more likely to engage with them. And what you can see on the buttons on the left is the Create Sky ID button, which is the one we want people to click, is almost equal in salience to the cancel button. And something I like to do to kind of test the saliency is to blur my eyes slightly. And you can see where your attention is being drawn. So when you blur your eyes, your attention's being drawn equally to those 2 buttons at the bottom. So we're not encouraging users to pick a specific one. But on the right, what you can see is we've reduced the opacity of that back button and made it much less salient in the visual field. So again, if you blur your eyes, suddenly you can see that top button is much more attention grabbing. The next principle that we've used, and I think this is a really interesting one, is called size congruency. And this is a principle that essentially influences our perception of the perceived importance of something, but also the perception of how many people are performing this specific behaviour. So if we think about that in our day-to-day lives, I suppose, if we think about money, a £5 note is smaller than a £10 note, is smaller than a £20 note. So as it gets bigger, its value is increasing. Or if you think about when you go to a restaurant, a bigger group of people get a bigger table and they get more chairs, they get more space dedicated to them in the restaurant. So there are all these cues in our environment that are indicating to us the value and the number of people that are performing specific behaviours. And we can actually translate those insights and those cues into the way we design our buttons. So you can see that we've created the Create Sky ID button to be much bigger than the back button, therefore communicating that it's more important, but also that more people are performing that behaviour than are performing the back or cancel behaviour. And then the final way we've used behavioural design in our buttons is through the language that we're using. So the word cancel has a very strong level of commitment that I'm making a decision that I definitely don't want to register and sign up for this process. And what we know is that psychologically, when people make a commitment and they've made a decision, they're much more likely to follow through on that behaviour consistently, because we don't want to go against our previous assertions. We like to be consistent with our past decisions. So that word cancel is very effective at making us want to stay opted out of this registration process. But what we've done is simply reframe that word to back. That feels much lower commitment. You're simply going back a stage rather than deciding you definitely don't want to sign up for this process. So This combined with, again, a few other interventions that we put place in the app, saw an 8.7% increase in the number of registrations to the Sky Kids app. So some of these simple tweaks in the way we design things like buttons can have a really positive impact on the behaviour that we're seeing from our customers. And the final case study that I'd like to take you through is a project that we did in the area of pensions. And Rafi mentioned at the beginning that finance is an area that is particularly ripe for behavioural science and behavioural design, because people are faced with so much complex information, so many different options that they're being presented with. So it's a really great opportunity to apply behavioural science to help customers understand their finances. And what we found is we were working with one of our clients called Aegon, and they were going through quite a big digital transformation at the time. But what they found was that they were still sending very analog paper statements. So every quarter throughout the year, they send their customers a paper statement which summarises the details of which funds their pension are invested in, the performance of their pension. And from a regulatory standpoint, they have to send these documents every quarter. But what they found was that people were not engaging with them at all. There was too much complex language, too many numbers, too many percentages for people to actively engage with the information. And we know in the UK that only 7% of the population is actually ready for retirement, which is quite a concerning statistic, especially for some of these big pension companies. So what they wanted to do was create a sort of format for people to engage with their pensions in a way that's easy to understand, easy to engage with, because paper statements were so complex that it was too broken to fix at that point. So we had to introduce something new, something innovative to get customers engaged. So what we did was we partnered with an agency and Aegon to create highly personalised digital summary videos that explain to customers exactly where they were in their pension journey and exactly what state their pension was in. So what I'm going to show you is one of the videos, an example of what that looked like. And what you'll see is that although the execution is very simple, there were actually 385,000 different computations to get that level of personalization in there to help customers understand, relevant to them, exactly where they were in their pension journey. So I will play the video for you now.
Hello, Robbie. Welcome to your Aegon Personalised Pension Summary. We've made this video especially for you, where we'll cover details about your pension, such as your contributions, your fund, and what your pension pot might be when you come to retire. We've put all of this information and more into your yearly statement, which will be with you on your policy anniversary. At your current age, we can see that now is an important time to continue building your pension. For now, make yourself comfortable and let's take a look at what's been happening with your pension over the last 12 months. So, here's what you've invested and here's what your employer has invested in that time. And as you know, you contribute through salary sacrifice, so you've helped to boost your pension pot. Which means the value of your pension pot is currently at this amount. It seems like your employer contributing to your pension is a valuable benefit. Additionally, you also have the payments you've made into your ISA. This is currently where you are in your pension journey. You can see how far you have to go to retirement, so bear this in mind when considering your decisions and attitude to risk going forward. As it stands, you're on track at an age of 65 to potentially receive a pot of this amount when you come to retire, which equates to a pension income of this amount each year. If this doesn't match your expectations, you may want to consider reviewing your retirement savings. You should use the goal planner to see what changes could make a difference, like increasing your contributions. You should think about your lifestyle choices for when you come to retire, remembering that your pension pot is there to last for your whole retirement. So that's everything from your day-to-day spending, such as your groceries, to holidays and enjoying days out. At the moment, we can see you've decided to switch out of the scheme's default fund, and it looks like you've made some active decisions. It's important you continue to review your investment choices to make sure they meet your goals, your lifestyle, and your attitude to risk. You should also check your contribution levels because any increase could make a difference. Just remember, the more you save now, the quicker you may reach your retirement goals. If you have more than one pot, it might be worth bringing them together. If you wish to make any changes, simply log on to your secure online account. Remember, this is your pension, you own it. So, it's important that you review your investment choice. If you have more than one pot, consider bringing them together and think about increasing your contributions, as this is an important time for you to continue building your pension. You'll find all the necessary links on this page to help you complete your next step. Thanks for watching.
Wonderful. So in the design of those videos, there were actually 36 different psychological principles that we applied. And as Rafi said, the visual processing is extremely important in terms of how customers are engaging with this information. So two of the nudges that I'll talk you through are related to our visual perception and processing. But one of the ones that I think is really interesting was actually related to our auditory processing. But the first one I'd like to talk you through is using the first person perspective. And one of the things that we really wanted to do was draw on some of the principles from the gaming industry, because we know that they are extremely effective at creating these highly immersive and motivating experiences for users. So things like Call of Duty, where you experience everything from that first person perspective. So you're actually in the environment, moving around, seeing it from your own point of view. We know that's incredibly effective at capturing attention, motivating behavior, and keeping people engaged. So one of the things that we applied within this video was using that first person perspective. So each individual viewing their video is moving around a particular room or a particular environment and seeing their pension story play out in front of them. And we know that that was going to be really effective in making sure that people felt engaged with the story that we were telling them. The second principle that we applied was the idea of modeling, which you will have seen towards the end of the video, where you could see the mouse clicking on different parts of the website. And what we've used here is modeling the desired behavior of going online and actively engaging with their pension, because we know that psychologically, when people view someone else performing the behavior that we're looking to drive, it makes people much more likely to perform that same behavior simply because we've seen someone else doing it. And we know that as we are all such social animals, we're always looking for cues of behavior that we can perform ourselves. So seeing that visualization of clicking on the website increased that desire for the viewer to do the same. And then the final one, which is the auditory nudge that we used, was the application of birdsong. So at the beginning of the video, you will have heard that really nice, soft, calming sound of birdsong. And this was a really interesting one. So from an evolutionary perspective, we know that birdsong is strongly associated with feelings of safety, because we know that if there were birds around in our environment, then there weren't any predators, otherwise the birds would have flown away. So hearing that birdsong is a really strong internal communication of that level of safety. And this was actually something that we'd seen in another application of something similar, was the use of birdsong. But what we found was that the birdsong that had been used by another company was a particular type of birdsong that was actually a warning sound indicating that a predator was approaching. So actually that induced a state of anxiety and stress. But by using this soft, happy birdsong at the beginning of the video, we're inducing a really calm and relaxed state at the beginning of the video. We know that pensions can be quite stressful for people because of that uncertainty of what's going to happen in the future. So actually inducing that state of relaxation and calm at the beginning makes people much more likely to engage with the information and be in a state that makes them able to understand and take on board the recommendations that we're giving. So, those three combined with another 33 different psychological principles that were baked in there produce some really exciting results. So the first two that you can see is the click-through rates. So we saw some really positive results in terms of people actually engaging with the content that we sent. But I think the most important finding that we got from this experiment that we conducted was that of the people who went on to view their video, 85% actually viewed it to the end, which is a really amazing achievement. And what that actually produced was these four statistics you can see at the bottom. So 22% went and checked their goal planner, 8% went and switched funds. And essentially what all of these indicators show is that people were making active decisions about their pensions after viewing their website, after viewing this video. So people were going online, engaging with their pension, thinking actively about where they wanted to be in the future in terms of their pension goals. And actually getting people to take those actions has historically been very difficult. So being able to produce these results, getting people to make goals about their investments, thinking about what funds are going to be most effective for them at their current state in their pension journey, made people much more likely to achieve their pension goals in the future. So this was a huge step change for Aegon, and I think it was a really exciting way that we can apply behavioural design to create really positive outcomes for our clients and for our customers. So that was a very sort of whistle-stop tour of some of the amazing ways that you can apply behavioural design in our work. But one of the things I'm most excited to share with you today is some details about our Cowry Global Summer School for 2021. And this is an event that we run every year, and we're very excited to be bringing it back again this year, later on in July. And it's a 2-week event where essentially we give a group of participants 4 things. So that's global experts, global scholars, global briefs, and global mentors. So we have a network at Cowry that we're part of called the Diversify Network. And this is a group of experts in the field of applied behavioural science who sit all over the world, from New Zealand to America to India to Europe, Africa. We've got contacts all over the world. And what that does is it's created a group of people who are extremely passionate and excited about sharing their work, their knowledge, and their applications of behavioural science. So we have speakers come in from these different countries to come and talk to you about how they're applying behavioural science in their particular context, in their particular field. So last year we had some really exciting talks, from things about how to use storytelling to create persuasive experiences, to how to apply behavioural science in health tech and digital apps that influence health behaviours. We've then got a group of global scholars. So this year we're inviting 40 scholars to attend our summer school. And what that does is it creates a network of like-minded individuals across the world who you can share your knowledge and experience with and get to know, and essentially create that network of people that you're going to have as contacts for the rest of your career. I actually attended the 2019 summer school, and it was a wonderful experience. I suppose when you're at the start of your career, I was just finishing my master's at that point. So to meet people who were as enthusiastic as I was about starting to apply all the insights they'd learned in their education was really wonderful, and to kind of share that experience with them and to learn from them, because people come from such different backgrounds. I think one of the things I learned from psychology is that no 2 psychology degrees are ever the same. So everyone comes from very different perspectives, even within the field of psychology itself. So that was really wonderful. The third thing that we're going to be offering is global briefs. And this is an opportunity to work on live projects with a charity partner. So each year we have multiple charity partners that come to us with a particular behavioural challenge that they're looking to solve. So the year that I participated, we worked with the Scottish charity air ambulance, and they essentially were looking to drive increases in the number of people that were volunteering to raise money for their charity. So what we did was looked at their leaflets, their promotional materials, the phrases they were using when they were engaging with potential donors, to create really effective interventions to drive increases in volunteering and increases in donations. So last year we had 4 charity partners. This year we're going to have even more charity partners. And what that means is, in each location you're in, you'll have a local charity partner to work with to deliver really effective behavioural science applications to help them achieve their goals. And then finally, you'll have a global mentor. So this year's summer school is a little bit different because we're going to be having 4 hubs that sit across the globe. So in particular, Apurva is going to be running our mentorship in India, which we're really excited about. And what that means is that you'll have a dedicated member of the Cowry team to offer you guidance and advice and support throughout the 2 weeks on a whole range of different things. So it could be in terms of thinking about your career, giving you advice in delivering your charity brief, and all the exciting ways that you can start to get involved in behavioural science. So you will have a dedicated point of contact. But I do have to say the entire Cowry team is extremely excited about summer school. So there'll be plenty of opportunities to meet everyone. But I suppose this year, things are a little bit different. So as I said, I attended the Cowry Summer School in 2019. There were 8 of us working on one charity brief for a week. And this actually took place in London. So at that time, obviously, when the world was normal, we all travelled down to the Cowry office in London for a week to participate in the summer school. And it was an amazing experience. Obviously, when 2020 came around, COVID hit, and we weren't particularly sure how to run a summer school in this sort of new environment. But we powered through, and we hosted our first virtual and global summer school last year. So we invited 20 scholars. I think we had people from America, India, across Europe, and a few other places, all dialing in to our virtual summer school. We had 4 charity partners who were dialing in to conduct this summer school across 2 weeks from all over the world. But at Cowry, we love to make things bigger and better every year. So for 2021, we're doubling the number of scholars that we're going to be taking on, doubling the number of charity partners we're going to be working with. And as I mentioned, we're going to be having this global experience that has 4 international hubs. So we won't have to worry about time zones with people dialing in at all hours of the day and night, because you'll have a dedicated hub with speakers from your time zone and charity partners from your time zone to work with. But then we'll also have events and speakers going across all of the hubs to bring you all together at certain times as well. And one of the things I suppose that is also making it different this year is having these 3 areas of expertise within the summer school. And at Cowry, throughout our time working in this field, we've developed these 3 specific specialisms within behavioural science. So firstly, looking at behavioural architecture, so people who develop behavioural strategies and interventions and think about how things like language influence our behaviour and influence our perceptions. Then this field of behavioural design that Rafi's been talking to you about, how we can create really perceptually persuasive experiences and assets to help people understand information in a visual format. And then finally, behavioural experimentation. So parts of our team who use things like big behavioural data, they use experimental design to test the efficacy of our behavioural science interventions. So all of the case studies that I talked you through underwent rigorous experimental design, to make sure that we could measure the tangible impact of our interventions, to check that, you know, we enhanced working at height behaviours, or we increased and optimised those registration journeys, to make sure that we are measuring the success of our interventions. So what we've done is tailored our application process this year for each of the 3 disciplines. So if your area of specialism is more in how we use language to influence behaviour, then the behavioural architecture route might be more for you. Or if you come from more of an experimental background or economics background, and you want to test the assumptions of behavioural science and check the efficacy, then the experimentation route might be for you. Or if you're a designer who loves working in softwares like Sketch, or if you're creative and like to think about how our visual perception influences our behaviour, then the behavioural design one might be for you. And I think what's exciting for us this year, as you'll know, Rafi and I and the whole Cowry team are extremely enthusiastic about sharing this field of behavioural design, because we know our definition is a little bit different than what currently exists out there. So what we're doing as part of this year's summer school is introducing the theme of behavioural design. And that's not to say that behavioural design is more important than behavioural architecture or experimental design, but it's a piece that's currently missing within the skill set. And I suppose within the education that people are receiving. So I know when I did my master's that, you know, I learned about how language and presenting different options can influence choice. And I learned about how to run experiments and test my data. But that piece of behavioural design and how we actually execute effective strategies was sort of a missing link. And that's something that we'd really love to help share our knowledge on with the behavioural science community. So we'll be thinking about how behavioural architects can support in creating these really fluent visual experiences, and how experimental designers can test the efficacy of these amazing assets with all their visual design incorporated. And also how behavioural designers can use a toolkit of visual biases and principles to create really compelling experiences. And we're very excited to say that applications went live on Thursday. So if you're a student, a professional, we take people from all walks of life, all educational backgrounds. And what we're really interested in seeing is your enthusiasm and your knowledge of behavioural science. So we're not asking for CVs, because we know that's not necessarily the best indicator of suitability for a role in this area. But what we want to see is your ability to understand and apply behavioural science principles in your work. So we're very excited to invite you to apply for our summer school this year. And we hope to review your application. They'll be open for the next 3 weeks. So if you can scan the QR code on the screen now, or go to cowryconsulting.com/summer school 2021. You'll find it easily on our website. So I invite you all to apply. So thank you very much for your time today. I'd like to open it up to any questions that might be in Menti.
Lots and lots of questions. That's lovely. Shall I go for this first one, Phoebes?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Okay, so how much of this effect can be attributed to the historic progression of visual design on the web? Do people that have no concept of the web page also give the same ratings? So I think this one was in relation to the task that we did, where we asked you to rate the different websites. And I'd say that there's a simple and there's a slightly more complex answer here. But what I'd say is that there has been a progression of visual design on the web. And the reason for that is because we have realized that actually when information is too complex, we simply won't engage with it. So over time, good designs that have been used and websites that have been invested in, you'll see that the complexity is less and less. What I would say though is that it doesn't just apply to web pages. So if we think about when we're looking at letters, when we're reading books, even just looking at a piece of art, there are differences that come through in terms of visual complexity. So absolutely, there has been progression in terms of visual design on the web, but this is something that affects you in everyday life as much as it does when you're looking at items in a digital space. So people that don't have a concept of a web page should also give the same ratings. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Let's maybe go back. Oh, Mark has answered.
I think there's a down button. You might scroll.
There you go.
There you go.
In the pension journey experimental results, are the stated numbers incremental effects against a control? Was there a non-digital alternative to the goal planner for the control group? Rafs, I think this might be a better question for you.
For sure. I mean, this was such an interesting project to work on. And I think the main reason that we found it so fascinating is that when we were working with Aegon, they knew that there was a problem in terms of engagement. And I'm sure you guys can agree that actually it's not particularly exciting to think about a pension. There's that massive empathy gap in terms of how soon you're going to get that information, how soon you're going to get your pension. So it's very much a decision that's set off in the future. So typically people weren't engaging with their existing paper-based pensions. We did measure this against a control. We actually ran it with a really large group of people, but there was still a control group that it wasn't sent out to. And there is always a non-digital alternative to the goal planner, regardless of whether you're in the control group or not, that you can access if you'd prefer. Obviously, we found some really fantastic results from sending this out digitally. We actually teamed up with, so we worked as behavioral scientists on the project. There was also a design team that created the actual creative and the visuals for the videos, as well as the email. And then there was a tech team that helped us figure out all of the complicated patterns that we needed, all of the information that was necessary, because out of the number of videos that were created, each one had such a high level of personalization that it was really complicated to put all the specific pieces together, including the customer's name, whether they'd opted into the default pension, how much they'd saved so far. So there were lots of different stats flying about. But yes, basically it was measured against a control. There was a non-digital alternative if people wanted to access it, and that was what the control group were using. They weren't sent a specific personalized video. They were sent it in the original format that all of the customers had been receiving since the start of their relationship with Aegon as a pension company.
Fantastic. Do you hire internationally? So I suppose I'll take this one. As we mentioned, that the summer school is open internationally, but I think it's important to note that we have 3 people in our team who are currently remote working in India. So, you know, we're open to speaking with people from all over the world, because we know that it's more about kind of your knowledge and application of behavioural science that we're looking for.
Absolutely. And we also have the ultimate of intention of bringing those team members over to the UK. So we also sponsor visas. We already have a couple of members of the team that we've done that for. So yeah, agree with Phoebes. Absolutely.
Fab. Does Cowry work with any Indian clients?
It's a good question. We're currently in discussions with HDFC Bank. And then also Phoebe mentioned Diversify earlier, that we're part of that global network. And actually we met with Flipkart yesterday, discussing how we can start to use behavioral science to optimize their customer experience. I think one of the interesting things that we've found so far about working with Indian clients and also just behavioral science consultancies in India is that we know that there are differences between weird and non-weird cultures, and this is why Diversify is so important to us, that actually we can understand the cultural differences, the individual differences that are occurring, and actually share that expertise across all of these different hubs across the world, so that we're working with people within their environment in a way that's going to be most beneficial to them. So we're hoping that over the next couple of years, we're working with more and more Indian clients. Absolutely.
What behavioural design considerations would you suggest we keep in mind if we want to apply these insights in India?
Might be worth talking a bit about Slice, Phoebe.
Yeah, I think so. At Cowry, I think Rafi is, I suppose, the person who created our Slice toolkit, which we're all extremely keen to be using at Cowry. And essentially, there are 5 principles within Slice. So first of all, saliency, which I spoke about during one of the case studies. So how can we use things like colour and size to orient customers' attention to specific objects and pieces of information? The second one is layout. So the visual hierarchy of information and the order in which we present information can be really influential in our perceived importance of that. So items and information that appear towards the top of the screen are deemed to be more important and have greater value. So thinking about the order in which we present information. We've got I, which is for imagery. So Rafi mentioned, obviously, visual processing is extremely important. And we know that our brains can process an image in about 13 or 14 milliseconds, I think. Whereas for a word, it takes us about 300 milliseconds to read the word and then 400 milliseconds to understand what that word means. So using imagery can be really effective at not only orienting our attention, but allowing us to understand information much more quickly. We've then got colour. So I think the Baker Miller pink example was a really nice case study of how colour influences our behaviour. But essentially, we know that warm colours are effective at driving action-oriented behaviour, whereas cool colours are more effective at encouraging people to wait. So thinking about how specific colours can influence and drive action is really important. And then finally, end goal. I think one of the things we often notice, especially in user experience design, is that the end goal often isn't extremely visually salient on a page. So you'll notice when I was fumbling around trying to figure out how to go on to the next question, that down arrow was so small that I hadn't spotted it. So that end goal for me wasn't visually salient enough. So when we're thinking about how to encourage action, we need to make it really clear what the next step is to make sure that people are actually able to take action. So the 5 things I would recommend thinking about would be saliency, layout, imagery, colour, and the end goal. Next question. How should one go about learning more about this? Is there some book or course you would recommend? I think one of the things we've done as part of the summer school application, so as I mentioned, we have those 3 specific streams that you can apply for, is we've curated a list of content that we think would be really helpful for anyone who's interested in looking at any of those streams. So I suppose whether you're interested in applying for the summer school or you're just interested in finding some more resources, then we've curated a list of content that we think is really helpful for behavioural architects, behavioural designers, and experimental designers. So I definitely recommend having a look at those lists. I think one of the books that captured my imagination in terms of what we talk about as behavioural design, specifically in UX, was a book called The Smarter Screen that takes you through how applications of behavioural science have been put into UX and design to really motivate behaviour. Rafs, are there any other ones that you think would be worth highlighting?
Susan Weishanks, I can never say her surname. 100 things every designer needs to know about people. That one's good. Definitely from thinking about how you can combine psychology and apply it to your design. It's an incredibly useful tool. It's quite practical.
Amazing. What skills do you look for when hiring behavioural designers at Cowry? Perhaps do you want to take this one?
Yes. Okay. I mean, It's a really interesting question, because I guess it's quite hard to understand how well someone will do behavioral design, because currently there's not really many avenues for people to learn how to do it or start applying it. So it's not like there's a specific test that we can look at. But what Phoebe and the team have done an amazing job of putting together as part of the summer school application is thinking about actually how can we teach some behavioral design, how can we educate candidates on our version of behavioral design so that they can then start applying it. And I'd say the main things that we're looking for is it's good to have a sense of creativity, 100%. But what we're not necessarily looking for is the ability to be able to design. So using Photoshop or InDesign, that's not necessarily what's important, because we believe that can be taught as a skill. What we're looking for is how behavioral scientists can translate well-known biases into the design itself. So if we were thinking about social norms, for example, as a piece of copy, you might say there are 532,401 people doing this right now. But how you would translate that into design is actually you might have an image where instead of just having an icon of a person, you might have an image where it looks like there are hundreds of people doing something. So creating these visual cues that have a similar impact to what the copy is stating. That's what we're looking for. We're thinking about, okay, can these people translate the biases into a visual representation, not just thinking about, okay, I'm going to stick some copy on here and that will drive the behavior, because we know that's not the case. So ultimately, I think the way that I would think about it is, can I create a narrative on the page? Where do I want them to look first? Where do I want them to look second? What conclusion do I want them to come to? And then what action do I want them to take? So how do we get them from A to B in the right order? That's probably what's most important. But again, we really appreciate that behavioral design is a new field. And I would recommend, even if you don't want to apply for the summer school, perhaps have a look at the application itself, so that you can start to think about, okay, how can I apply this within my own space?
Fabulous. I think it's worth noting, I suppose, that when I started at Cowry in 2019, I had absolutely no background in design, no formal design education. And it's something that I've learned and come to love in my time at Cowry. So if you've got that passion and enthusiasm for behavioral science and want to think creatively about how you can apply it, then behavioral design is something really exciting that you can learn to do. In your opinion, is the field of behavioral science finally taking notice and understanding the importance of the behavioral design field? Rafi, I think you've been curating quite a good response to this question over the last few weeks.
I've got quite a strong opinion on this. And towards the start of the year, there were some wonderful reviews that came out on LinkedIn that were looking at the state of behavioral science in 2021 and what we think is going to happen. And one of the things that came out a lot is that there is a need for design, but the way that it was described is we need to be collaborating with more designers. And as I mentioned earlier, although that's taking it to a certain level, and that's great that we're including the aesthetics, there is that other step that can make the interventions work harder. We're implementing the psychology into the design itself. So yes, I think that the community is finally starting to take notice of the importance of design, but no, I don't think they're necessarily understanding the importance of designing behaviourally. And this is one of the things that we would really like to push. This is why we have included it as the theme for the summer school. And it's one of the things that we're going to be talking about more and more. So we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
Is there a fixed structure or approach that Cowry uses to arrive at some of these conclusions? Are they mostly focus group discussions? I think that's a really interesting question. So I suppose at Cowry, typically our projects follow a 3-step process where the team in the first step look at a particular experience or asset to identify what we call the psychological friction in an experience. And the toolkit that we use for that is what we call the C factors. So we know that in the literature and all of the academic journals, there are about probably 200 to 250 specific biases and heuristics that are documented in terms of how they influence our behaviour. And at Cowry, through our experience and by looking at some of the most sort of highly efficacious studies, that there are specific biases that are the most impactful in our decisions. And we found that there are about 15 that are the most influential. So things like social norms, looking at the behaviour of others, things like defaults, so what behaviour are we automatically opted into performing, or things like authority, so who is conveying a particular message. If they're in a position of authority, we're more likely to act on and be influenced by that. So I suppose the approach that we take when we're understanding behaviour is through the lens of these specific biases. So we would conduct an audit of the asset or the experience and identify, okay, there's a poor use of social norms here, we're actually encouraging the wrong behaviour, or this message isn't coming from a specific individual and therefore it lacks authority. So through the lens of the C factors, we can identify the areas that need improving from a behavioural science perspective, which we then take into phase 2 of our process, which is behavioural design. So how can we optimise all of these points of psychological friction using the biases and heuristics that we know exist in our daily decision making? So how can we introduce a figure of authority? How can we produce an effective social norm that conveys the behaviour we're looking to drive? And how can we perhaps automatically opt people into a particular service that we know is going to be beneficial to them? So there are all these different ways that we can apply these biases. And then in terms of the final stage, we then run an experiment, which is most typically an A/B split test, where we measure our interventions compared to the control. So leaving the same, exactly what they did before, and comparing it to all of the biases and interventions and nudges that we've introduced into our work to make them effective.
And I think just to add to that, we workshop as a team of psychologists with our collective expertise to reach interventions. But actually on some of the briefs when required, we will run some customer research up front, typically not focus groups, because we know that tends to produce more explicit answers and that's not always indicative of what people are actually going to do. So we, as much as possible, we try to use implicit system 1 research, whether that's in the form of eye tracking, implicit association tests, to give us a more accurate idea of how people are going to behave. That shapes our interventions. And then again, we try to use implicit research, again, to test the efficacy, as well as control groups, A/B testing, to make sure that we're getting the right results.
Amazing. Okay, all of this sounds so fascinating. Thank you so much. Could you give us a brief explanation of how you test your interventions in the complex real world settings? So I suppose we've touched on this a little bit already, but typically when we work with our clients, we set a clear expectation at the beginning of our projects that we want to test these interventions that we're applying. So what we do is we identify an experimental group. So let's say that's 100 individuals, for example, that we're going to give the Cowry optimized experience. So if that was a letter, we'd be sending 100 customers the optimized letter where we've used behavioral science. We then also make sure that we have an identified control group that we identify before we run the experiment and that stays consistent throughout the experiment, that continue to receive the same letter as they did before from our client. We then have a team of experimental designers and data analysts that will analyse the change in behaviour. So whether that be a particular behaviour, if we want customers on the back of that letter to go and register for an online account, we'll then measure the difference in behaviour between the control group and the experimental group. Obviously, in the real world, it is a little bit more difficult than it is when you're at university running quite controlled experiments. But we are very careful when we run these experiments to make sure that we identify any potential confounding variables and that we keep strict with the treatment versus control groups to make sure that we have a really effective study. Amazing. So, and the next one. Is Cowry exploring implementation of its behavioural science concept for Indian industry, especially in financial banking domain? I suppose this is maybe where we'd be looking to go with HDFC Bank, Rafi.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that very much we'd like to do. I think because so much of our expertise and our experience is looking at behavioural science in the financial sector, then absolutely we'd look to do this on a global scale.
I think one of the really interesting things we're also working on at the moment is developing a database of insights in terms of how these different biases and heuristics are different across various countries. So we know that things like pricing psychology can be quite different in the Western world versus the Eastern world, and how discounts are perceived and how trustworthy they are. So that's one of the things I'm finding really fascinating at the moment, is identifying how some of these biases can vary across different contexts and cultures. In the pension experiment, did the duration of the video get in the way? How many users watched till the end, or at least till the part where there's important information for them? So
this is a really good question, and I think it's interesting actually to just reflect on the process that we went through with the client, where the videos initially were a lot shorter, and actually we had to go back and just reinforce the fact that we needed to put more behavioural science in, which was increasing the length of the video, because again, it was adding to that cognitive load where they were trying to get through the video as quickly as possible to share this information, thinking we're not going to be able to hold the attention span of the customer. So what we did is, at the start of the video, there's a very clear setup in terms of managing the expectations of the customer on how long it's going to take and actually what we're going to take them through. There are so many fascinating studies around management of expectations, specifically to do with time. And actually, we know that people are willing to wait as long as we tell them how long it's going to take. And in an accurate way, it can't be it's going to take 10 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 10 minutes. It needs to be, it's going to take 30 minutes to do this one task, and then people can judge whether they want to do that or not. So we managed the expectations at the start of the video. We kept up the level of personalization throughout the video. And what we were really pleased to see, because we had a lot of pushback from the client, but we stayed firm on it. What we were really pleased to see is that users did watch until the end of the video. There wasn't a high level of drop off. And actually, if they started, I think it was around 90%, although I'll have to check the stat on that. But it was the majority of customers that would watch until the end of the video, and then they would actually engage with the call to action at the end. So the duration of the video was definitely up for debate. But using the behavioral science principles and managing the customer's expectations, you can get them to engage for longer periods of time, as long as you make sure that they know what to expect right at the front of the process.
Fantastic. Does the summer school application require IELTS scores? I think we maybe mentioned this on the summer school website, that in order to participate, we do need a basic level of English. So I would suggest reading the summer school website to get a more specific answer on that. Was the Margaret Thatcher example based on Reineke's paper? She did an amazing job of presenting how the first impression works.
I don't think it was. I think it actually predated that paper. However, the research that was done in that space, agreed, was absolutely fantastic. And it's one of the things that Shlomo Benazzi talks about in the Smarter Screen that Phoebe referenced earlier. So if you'd like to read more about the applications of the paper and what's been done since then I would fully recommend reading that book.
Excellent. Interesting nudge to increase the fluency of the users to sign in or register. However, I see a problem with the intervention. The nudges applies visual interference, a dark pattern. Please explain.
So I think this one was in reference to the Sky Kids one, Phoebe. What I'd say, and obviously feel free to answer as well, Phoebes, is that for it to be a dark pattern, I think we would have had to have removed or hidden the option for them to click on the button, because we were slightly reducing the size and the saliency of the button, but we weren't removing it as an option. I wouldn't necessarily refer to it as a dark pattern. And actually, it's one of the things that we're very careful to make sure that we don't implement, especially because we use design a lot. And at Cowry, we have a 5-stage ethical framework that we stick to, where the first one is we're making sure that we're giving customers enough freedom to make a choice. We don't want to take it away, and we make sure all of the options are transparent. We want to be honest in that our nudges are always built on information that's true. We take effort to identify the consequences beforehand. So we will scrutinize all of our interventions in a pre-mortem, and we'll make sure that we're continuously checking the results of a nudge in case there are any unintended consequences. And we're also just making sure that we're nudging for good. So the nudges that we apply, if we wouldn't apply them to ourselves, we wouldn't apply them to anyone else. So we're very much making sure that as we implement these different interventions, which is especially important, again, in the financial sector, because the customers need to make an informed decision, that we're making sure we're applying it in an ethical way and definitely staying away from dark patterns. We wouldn't recommend them at any point.
Absolutely. I think just to reinforce what Rafi has said, we do take the definition of nudge, to our hearts, where ensuring people do have the freedom of choice, the ability to opt out of our nudges and to choose differently. So I think, although the intervention definitely nudges people towards signing in or registering, people still have that freedom to choose and easily find the alternative option. So yeah, in agreement on that one. Okay, can these insights be replicated?
We're going to hand back over to Anushree because we're coming up to the end.
Oh, fine. Excellent.
Okay. Yes, so we're nearing the end of the session, and I'd like to thank Phoebe and Rafi for such an engaging session. There was so much to learn. My personal favorite case was the pension fund video. I really hope companies and governments across the world implement that and help people be more prepared for their retirements. Thank you to everyone who joined the live stream. We hope you all have learned something new today. We'd love to hear from you on how you liked today's session and what we can do to improve future events. We've posted the link in the chat, so please take out a few minutes and do let us know. If you'd like to associate with IBEN as an individual or an organization, please reach out to us on info@iben.co.in. Thank you once again and wish you all a beautiful day.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.